Hey everybody, Schilly with the Go Box and Go Artist Bar and Studio in Portland, Oregon. We're going to be doing a date night tonight, so grab a loved one. Let's sling some paint. So tonight we're going to be working on a Crater Lake date night painting that I think is a really great introduction into doing a nice sunset with some water. We got some mountain. I'm going to look off to the side over here because I've got the original over there to look at. But Crater Lake's been one of those paintings that really has done very well for us in the studio. It's kind of, you think of an iconic image in Oregon in particular, you're going to think about Crater Lake as one of those, I call them like kind of the big 3 or 4 landmarks that people really think of. And if you think of people like outside of Oregon, it might be the #1 thing they think of since it is our only national park in Oregon. So we're going to get going on this. We're doing a diptych, and I'm going to switch over so you can see the canvas real quick. There we go. I'll pop up in the corner here. So a diptych basically is one painting over 2 canvases. And that's what we're going to do tonight. So you're going to have to work with your partner. You're going to have to make sure that you guys behave, don't get too crazy and sling paint on each other or anything like that. But these are a great way to work on a painting together, something you can hang up and be part of your lives together. Or maybe, I always love this idea, a brother and a sister or 2 siblings doing a painting for their mom and dad for an anniversary present or something like that. Awesome different things you can do with these paintings, or simply you can paint it by yourself like I'm going to be doing tonight, and you can hang it up. I think these paintings look really good when they're framed and hung with just a little gap in between the 2 of them. But hey, who knows? Maybe we just put it on the wall together. We'll figure that out later. Let's go ahead and talk really quick about our colors. Tonight, we're going to be using pretty basic colors. We're going to be using black and white, pretty much go-tos all the time. We're also going to be using blue, which is our sapphire blue from our Go Box core paints. We've got ruby red, and we've got daffodil yellow. Those are going to be basically, we might recognize those from grade school as being our basic primary colors. Now, there's a different school of thought now about primary colors, but we're not going to get into that tonight. We'll maybe do another video about that sometime in the future. So, with all that said, it's always good to start off with a toast. I'm going to toast by myself here. You're not going to be able to see it. That's okay. I know I'm doing it. Let's toast to having a great time together and commemorating one of our great national parks, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, Crater Lake. Cheers, y'all. So this painting really starts pretty much with painting the sky and the water, and that's the bulk of this painting anyway. It's getting the sky and water all, I don't want to call it blended, because blended's not really what we're shooting for. A lot of times we get too focused on trying to blend things, and we kind of miss out on what's going on with the rest of the painting. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take my biggest brush. This is going to be the brush that we use most of the time tonight. And I'm going to rinse it off in my water jar. And I am just going to paint this starting with some of our yellow. And I'm going to start right around the middle and do just a nice band of yellow all the way across. Maybe about, let's call it about 2 inches. You can go a little higher. It's always better to go a little further than you think you need to. One of the things that is really difficult to do with acrylic paints as a whole is to get a nice, beautiful blend, especially when we're doing like a sunset sky. And I'm sure we've all seen Mr. Ross and his techniques of doing all these wonderful sunsets. And he uses oil paints. And oil paints really just, they don't dry very fast. In fact, when I used to work in oil paints, a lot of times you'd work on a painting for a couple hours, and then you'd set it aside for a day or 2, sometimes even a week, before you could actually paint on it again, unless what you're trying to do is a nice color blend. One thing you might want to do while you're working on this is paint down in this little gap here. And oil paints are great, but acrylic paints have their own benefits, and one of the things they don't do as well as oil paints is blend. So in this particular painting, what we're going to do is we're actually going to kind of just avoid trying to blend And we're just gonna roll with it and pretend we've got a nice yellow sky sunrise or sunset, whichever you want to feel like it is to you. And we're gonna have that kind of blend into some patchy clouds, and then we're gonna have a little bit of the sky peeking through at the very top. So what I like to do, I'm working in a hot room tonight. It is that time of year for us here in Oregon, and this paint's gonna dry really fast. So I'm gonna paint up my couple of inches here. I'm gonna take now, I'm not gonna rinse my brush or clean it. You might rinse it once in a while just to keep it fresh. Paint does kind of dry pretty quick on the bristles. You wanna make sure that doesn't happen too bad. But I like to move up maybe about a ½ inch above where I stopped, and then bring that color down. And what's really important if you're trying to make this feel like a blend is brushing back and forth along that transition. So I'm putting my brush right here in the middle, and I'm going back and forth, and I'm not trying to be real precise with this, and that's how those colors get to mix and mingle together a bit. And I'm just gonna keep working my way up a bit here. Now you can do like I'm doing right now, and you can bring that color right in on top of the yellow, but I think it's good if you're just learning to start just a little bit higher and bring that color down. And the reason I like to do that is it's really easy when you're first getting started to kind of have this oh no mode where all of a sudden you've got your red and your yellow, and it's like just this harsh line between the two. And so it's really good, I think, to kind of just let them meet in the middle. And sometimes you can come back with a little extra yellow, but you want to brush this yellow in along that transition just to freshen it up a bit. And I've got my computer going over here with my picture, and it just decided it's gonna take a little siesta. Wake up, computer, wake up. I say, wake up, computer. All right, let's see here. Let's rearrange this a little bit. I should think after a year of doing these on videos, I'd have a better grasp of how to keep all this stuff going. Yeah, every day's a learning process, just like with painting. All right. So the finished painting does have some bright pink in there. We'll put that in later. We're just gonna use this red as our kind of our buffer and our foundation. So I'm just going to keep working my way up. And I can tell my brush is starting to stick a little bit to the canvas, which means paint's drying on the bristles. So I'm just going to give that a quick little rinse. I'm not going to worry about my water getting dirty today. It's just not really something I ever worry about too much. Once in a while. But I try to lay these paintings out so it's just not that much of an issue. So I'm going to work up another couple inches. Dun, dun, dun. 2 more inches or so ish, kind of maybe. Don't break out a ruler on this. When I say 2 inches, just kind of guesstimate. All right, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start transitioning into blue. And the blue is a little bit, it's very much a dominant color on our palette. So it likes to take over. I'm not going to worry about rinsing my brush right now. Excuse me. I'm just going to go ahead and bring this blue right in at the top. And just like we did before, and again, I'm not worrying about patches for the sky or things like that. I'm just going to brush this in, and just like before, I'm going to bring that color down to my red. And where those two colors start to come together, I don't want to sing too much. Beatles are pretty bad about saying, hey, you can't use our song in your video. Not that I've found out the hard way or anything, but I hear rumor that that is true. All right, I'm just going to brush this across. Now what I want to do with this right now is I do feel like, oh, this transition's getting a little too, here's my primary colors. So I'm going to take a little bit of white now and let it kind of mix these two colors together, yeah? I don't know why I'm talking like Foghorn Leghorn tonight. I'll say it. You guys remember who that is, I hope. I don't know. Maybe. I want these colors to come together, though, and create kind of a little bit of a lavender buffer. If we don't do that, what we end up with is a really dark purple. But you can see right over here where I'm working, I'm not getting any blend, and that's okay. This is just our foundation. I'm not worried about blends. Blends are overrated. They're great in Photoshop. But when we're painting with real paint, imperfection in those blends is how we know that somebody picked up a brush and painted it. Somebody will be like, that's a lost art. I'm learning it now. Alright, whatever. I hope you guys are giggling. I might be, I don't know. I'm always laughing on the inside, that's for sure. Alright, so just kind of keep these colors going in here. You know, I think I'm actually gonna, I think I'm gonna let that sit for right now. I am going to actually go ahead and mix up a little bit of some more red and the blue mixed together. So our sapphire red and our, I'm sorry, sapphire blue and ruby red. Yeah, Paul, that made a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay. Just kind of bring this darker color in, and what that does is it gives us this great dark, well, there we go. Okay, that was interesting. We don't need that to be recording. Let's turn that off. I don't know what's going on here. There we go. Alright, we had a little mishap with the overhead camera. Apparently it decided it wanted to record instead of just hang out and do its thing. Had that happen the other night too. We got some new gadgets in the studio, so we're still learning how to use some of them. Anyway, so I'm bringing this darker purple in, and I'm trying to take away that, keep it from being quite so vividly that bright blue. Nothing you do up here is really going to hurt anything about this painting in any way, shape, or form. So it's totally all good. Again, it's embrace this, the streakiness. Don't feel like it needs to blend. Just get it covered. Just get it covered. There we go. So that's a good start. Again, we're going to kind of come back and we're going to ease this up so it's not quite so, here's a yellow stripe, here's a red stripe, here's a blue stripe. We're going to come back in and we're going to add some buffer zones in. We're going to add in some other colors to make it look like there's more clouds and things like that, atmospheric stuff in the air. Get my sample picture up again. There it is. Okay. So we're going to leave that for right now, though, because we want that to dry before we try to paint over the top of it. What we're going to do next is we are going to give our brush a good rinse, and we're going to move down into our water. Now, one of the things I like to point out is it doesn't matter if your water is if your rinse water is a little bit dirty, because when we start working in the reflection, all of that's going to be kind of muted and reflecting a lot of other colors. So having this be perfectly yellow going down from here is really not that important. What's more important is kind of getting the tones on there and the feeling that it's reflecting yellow. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start taking some yellow and I'm just going to start whisking straight down. You can see, I don't know if you can see, I'm holding the brush pretty far back. And I like this. It keeps me from putting too much pressure on the brush. Now we want to make sure we're getting enough paint on that we're not seeing the canvas in through the main band here. I'm just going to go all the way across here. This is kind of a little bit of a change that I've been doing lately as far as painting water. Usually I'm very much about always painting all your brush strokes horizontal, and that's good for most types of water, I think. But I decided to play around with this more like the way I've seen some television personalities do their reflections by pulling the color down. And there's some, I understand why they do that. It does to kind of give the idea that this color is being stretched down into the water, and it just helps. Now, just like so. I'm going to take a little bit of our red now, just a little bit, and I think I'm going to mix it with some yellow. So I'm going to mix about 50-50 red to yellow, just to not make it be so intense. And I'm just going to start now whisking this up into our yellow. You can give it a little side to side here and there. And again, this is the only thing I'm really concerned about at this point, is that you're getting the paint on thick enough that you're not seeing canvas showing through, but not so thick that it's gloppy mess. Sometimes it's good to use really thick paint. Most of my landscape type paintings that we do in the studio, we don't use really super thick paint, because we're using fluid, or I guess I shouldn't say fluid, but thin bodied acrylics, and it's really hard to get that texture built up with this thin of a paint. Now if I get going too fast and you guys need some time to catch up or grab another beverage or anything like that, pause at any time. Take all the time you need. Well, maybe not all the time you need. You got to get it done at some point, right? All right. These beginning stages of a painting are really interesting to me, because they really go through these phases that you're kind of like, what? What is going on with this, Paul? Oh, by the way, I introduced myself as Schilly. That's my old nickname. My real name is Paul. You can quote me on that. Hey. All right. So I'm getting a little bit of color from my brush from washing. Give it a little bit of, you can kind of do some back and forth like this a little bit, but you want to do it very light. You barely want the brush to touch the canvas at all. All right, that's looking good. I'm happy with this so far. Now we're going to do the same thing we did up above. I'm actually going to go ahead and mix together my blue and red to make myself a nice little dark purple. Again, just going to kind of wisp this up just the bottom inch or so. This you can kind of brush back and forth and then just give it a nice little tug up into the other colors. The key to this part right now, and maybe I should have said this a minute ago, but if you're struggling getting that kind of wispy kind of look, it's probably because you got a little too much paint on your brush. And the other thing that happens, and I'm having it happen right now, right here, is that paint's not wanting to stick because the paint's not getting enough of a chance to actually dry. You might get some funky colors going on in here, and that's okay. That's okay. Again, this is just like with our upper part of the sky. This is just our foundation. We're going to paint more on top of this later. I always feel it's like you spend about 80% of the time when you're painting working on laying down foundations for the final 15% of the details. And I don't like using the word detail personally, but that's really what it is. It's coming back at the end and finishing things up. Setting the stage, so they say. All right, well, had a little camera difficulty there. I don't know what's going on. It's never done this before. I'm not going to worry about it too much. We got stuff to work on, and if I need to go back and redo this painting, I go back and redo this painting. But hopefully everything's on there. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch brushes because I want to have a nice kind of fresh brush to start this with. And because I'm going to start putting in some white into our sky, because I really think it's really important to kind of brighten this up. Now we've kind of got this little stripe of white through here. That's not going to be there when we're done with the painting. So I'm just going to take some pure white. I'm using a different brush, and the reason I wanted to use a different brush is I want this to go on pure white and not be contaminated by our water or our brush not getting perfectly clean. But I'm really just kind of very lightly kind of streaking in. You might probably can hear that. Some little smudges. I think it's, you don't want to go all the way across the canvas, kind of want to keep it off to this right hand side. I want to feel like the brighter area of the canvas is on this side, while our darker tones are more on our left hand side. But while we're using this brush, while it's still fresh, I'm going to mix up a little bit of pink. So I'm going to take some white, little tiny bit of red. I'm going for a nice little bubblegum kind of color. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of smudge it along in some pockets up here. It's going to kind of give us the idea, this feeling. I got a feeling that this pink is gonna... whatever. You guys don't want to hear me sing. Especially not, I'm not good at that kind of singing. Anyway, just gives us the idea that we got some light shining up on these more reddish kind of clouds, which gives us those nice pink sunset-y clouds that we see a lot. You can throw a little extra white into that if you want. The other thing that looks nice to do at this point is you can take a little bit of this pink. I like to actually kind of bring some little streaks, and I try to keep these streaks kind of more horizontal, but kind of break up that edge. So break up that, if you've got that hard line kind of that's happening on its own, you can kind of take a little bit of this color and just kind of let it trail down a little bit. And I try to keep those going fairly close to horizontal. I know when we look straight up at clouds, they look, oftentimes look like cotton balls and bunny rabbits and all kinds of things that our imagination comes up with. But when we look out across a landscape, typically what we see, not always, but we see the bottom edges of clouds, and then clouds build up from there. So we're just going to go ahead and let that be kind of that way. Now the other thing I want to do is when I start getting up into this territory, I'm going to mix up a little bit of a lavendery kind of color as it fades up into our more purples. So a little bit of blue, a little bit of red, a little bit of white. Use your own eyes. Think to yourself, does that look red enough? Does that look pink enough? If it doesn't, add a little bit more red. If it looks too pink, it needs more blue, whatever. Again, it's just this really loose, smudgy choppiness. And you can see what that starts to do is it starts to really just break up our sky from being too rigidly stripy. Mix up a little bit more. And I kind of just mix paint as I go, y'all. I don't just like go mix up a big batch and say, okay, that's it. I'm only going to use this, because I would prefer to mix smaller batches and mix as I go than to try to mix one big batch, because I get some color variation this way. And the color variation really helps, I think, when we get done with the painting, because instead of having, like, let's say, for example, let's keep it really simple. If all we did was paint with red and then blue, we would have a painting that was red and blue. But if we mix red and blue together, we get purple. So all of a sudden we've got a third color. Now if we're mixing red and blue to get purple, but we vary that mix, all of a sudden we've gone from 2 colors to 3 colors to endless numbers of colors between just those 2 colors of mixes. And you start adding white and black and stuff like that into the mix, and things get pretty radically different in a hurry. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and rinse my brush. So again, it's feeling a little bit like it's sticking to the canvas, and it's okay to go ahead and do that right now. So I'm gonna start mixing up our light sky color. And I'm just mixing white and blue together. And this is gonna help this blue stop feeling quite so intense. And again, everything I'm doing up in here, I'm just doing real light, not slathering the paint on super thick. You can see it doesn't take very much. I really like just kind of throwing this light color on top of the dark. It really works good to me. You can add a little more blue if you want. I kind of like it to be just barely noticeably blue. That I got a little too much blue, but that's okay. What I want to make sure though is if I do something like that where I just put that bit of blue on there and I felt like it was too much, I want to make sure that when I try to fix it, that one of the easiest ways to fix it is actually take some more of that blue and add it in other places so it doesn't feel like it's out of place. But I'm kind of content with that right now. Yeah, I can live with that. Maybe we can always come back and make some minor little adjustments, things like that. What we're going to do next is we're going to switch. We are going to switch to our biggest brush. And what we're going to mix up is kind of what like a grape bubblegum kind of color. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of my blue, a little bit of red. And watch out for the drips. You can add a little tiny bit of white to it so it's not quite so dark. It's going to look dark on our canvas, so you kind of got this. And what we're going to start doing is we're going to start by creating our hills that are in the background, our mountain, our rim of our crater. I'm just going to start going right along here, giving myself a little bit of a horizon line. Now I don't want to lose all this white that we painted in up here, so I'm just going to really quickly, I'm going to start kind of just brush in a little bit of a mountain peak. You can see this mountain is very wide compared to its height. And then it kind of goes up again. I think most of the time people, when they struggle with mountains, what they try to do is they try to go really way too jagged, way too tall and narrow, instead of thinking about doing something that's just nice and broad, the big foundation. Maybe come up a little higher right here. There we go. And then, so this one's going to be on the right hand side. Those of you working on the left, what you're going to do is you're actually going to take this a little higher than our horizon line. There we go. And this is just going to kind of bounce along fairly horizontal and just kind of start to taper up towards the far left, like so. Go ahead and fill all this in. I can tell I haven't mixed my paint super thoroughly, and that's okay. It gives us all kinds of natural variation, which is stuff that we can add in later, or we can just let it happen on its own right now. That's how we keep it from being quite so just like a cutout piece of paper stuck on the canvas. There we go. Now, just like we did before, we're going to kind of do this little whisking motion. So I'm going to take a little bit of the same color. Actually, let's go ahead and give ourselves a little bit more of a foundation first. Let's make sure we've got at least a brush width of color all the way across here. Make sure we've covered all of the remaining canvas that was showing. Just using that same purple color. See, sometimes you just got to think on the fly. It's like, oh, no, wait, that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure we've got enough mountain crater rim. Now, again, I'm just going to start giving this a little tiny whisk down. From our base tone. And I'm just going to kind of try to mimic. So where this goes up, I'm going to come down a little further. Sometimes you might want to maybe turn your brush a little bit if you want to get it mimicking just a little closer. And you can see we're kind of losing a lot of this yellow. Well, that's okay, because that yellow is going to be blocked. That yellow from the sky is going to be blocked by the rim of the crater. So we're not going to see as much of that yellow showing down into our water anyway. You can kind of very lightly give it a little side to side little wisp here and there once you run out of paint. You almost want to make it feel like you can't quite see where the reflection ends and the rim of the crater begins. That's kind of a nice little thing. I think so often we feel like we have to sketch in a shoreline, and that, I know, again, I'll mention that guy on OPB. He was my idol growing up. I still very much respect him. But a lot of the things he did are designed to kind of trick the eye into thinking and seeing something. So, and that is painting as a whole. It's what we're doing anyway. But a lot of times he'd throw in a little shoreline across the back. But one of the things that I think happens is when we start putting those shorelines in, it makes that shoreline feel much closer because we can see it. It's defined. But if we want this to feel like it's much further away, we leave the shoreline out so that we think, oh, it's far enough away that I can't even really see the detail of that shoreline showing up. One thing you can do is you can take a little bit of extra white and add to your color. And you can just really quickly lighten this up a bit where the water is. I call that putting the surface on it. You don't want to get too much though, because then it gets, again, it takes away from our lightness in the sky. It does a lot of little things that we don't necessarily want it to do. All right, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. That looks good. Now from this point on, we've really got our foundation set for our painting. So what we're really going to do from now on is just kind of add some little surface details. We'll put in Wizard Island here in a bit. But before we go over to using the black paint, I want to make sure we get all the colors down here dialed in to kind of mimic what's up here before we contaminate our water with black paint. So what I'm going to do next is we're going to now work, and we can use our biggest brush. I think works good for this. So I'm going to make sure I get it nice and rinsed off, nice and clean. Again, if it's got a little bit of pigment to it, it's not going to hurt it too much because the water is not going to be as pure of color as our sky is. So I'm going to mix together a little bit of white and a little bit of yellow. I'll just show you guys. I've got a little bit of blue on my brush. That's okay. Let me just show you here, right here. A little bit of yellow, a little bit of white. What happens is we need to add this little bit of white to the yellow because the yellow itself is not very opaque, meaning it's not going to sit on the canvas and really do its job to show up on its own, which kind of is okay with what we're doing right now. But I'm just going to start doing some light side-to-side brush strokes. If you want to use a little bit smaller brush, you can. And I'm just flirting with the edge of this reflections. Use a little bit more yellow. If it ever feels too white, just add a touch more yellow. And it's okay, over here we've got some lighter So if you get a little bit of white in there, I'll go ahead and do some just in case, just for fun. I missed it. Ha! It happens. Happens to all of us. All right. Let's do a little bit of extra light right there. There we go. A little bit here. But you can see what I'm doing again is nice big choppy brush strokes. And I said earlier that I really like doing horizontal brush strokes. But now what we're doing is we're doing both, we already have our vertical brush strokes underneath, which indicate to the eye reflection. And then these side to side. So that one went a little too high. I'm not going to worry about it because that's where my wizard island's going to be. But these side to side give the suggestion of surface. So reflection and surface are two completely different things. I'm not going to come down very far with this. Maybe about like so. Now I also want to mimic some of our lighter colors up in the sky, so I'm going to mix up a little bit of some pink. I'm not worried about cleaning my brush right now because that little bit of yellow is not going to hurt anything. Maybe a little bit more white. There we go. And I don't want to cover. I don't want to lose the color that's underneath. We want to make sure that color hangs out for us and does its job. I maybe got a little too bold with that pink. That's okay. Just add a little bit of red back in. So we don't need to have as much detail as far as getting our colors matched exactly in the sky. But I am going to go ahead and bring in some of that light blue. Again, I'm not worried too much about cleaning my brush. It's okay if these colors kind of mix together and create new colors. It's totally fine. But I'm just going to throw in a little bit of our... I kind of look, is there a patch there? Okay, I'm going to throw a little patch down here. But I'm not going to get too focused on being perfect about making everything match up. I just want it to suggest that it does. I hope you guys hum and stuff too while you're painting, because if you don't, then I'm just kind of goofy, and I guess if you ask my wife, that's probably true anyway. Alright. So I do feel like I've got my paint's kind of thin in through here, and I feel like I want to bring some more kind of lavender in to the mix. So I'm just going to mix up a little bit of lavender using my red and blue and adding just a little bit of white. And I'm going to go a little bit on the pinkish side of lavender. So almost like a dusty rose. There we go. I like how that feels. It looks messy. So this is one of those things. This kind of painting is something that when you look at it up close, it really feels like a hot mess. But when you step back, that's when it really starts to come together. And I'm looking up at the monitor to see how everything's working. And I see it's looking more on the monitor like what I hope it looks like. Up close, it looks a little bit train wrecky. And that's okay. We've got some other elements that are going to kind of kick in here and cover up some of these things that maybe you might be feeling a little bit uncomfortable with. Some transitions, but I think like this side, I really like how this side is turning out. This side is okay. We've got this patch of really bright yellow here, which shouldn't be there, but that's right where our island's going to be. So that's going to be totally fine. I think one of the things I want to do as I'm looking at this is I feel like this area up here is just a little too dark for our island to show up against. So really quick, I'm going to mix up again. That was our dark purple. So it's our red, our ruby red, and our sapphire blue. I'm going to add a little tiny bit of white so it just makes it a little lighter. And the cool thing about doing this, I'm just kind of just brushing this in very lightly on top. You can be a little bit more careful up along your sky. You can give it a little whisk, flip down into the water is fine. you don't have to go up very high. But I do like to do this a lot of times when we've got like a lake scene like this or a mountain scene, because it implies that we've got maybe a little bit of mist or something hanging out right above. We're not gonna do details and snow and mountains on that. That's for another time. That's one of my favorite things to paint, but that's for another painting. All right, so Wizard Island. Wizard Island is one of those things that we're gonna keep it real simple. Now, islands as a whole, when you look at them, what you see is where the bottom, obviously you see the top, but where they touch the water, what you're seeing is typically a horizontal plane, because water is always, at least in a lake, in a horizontal plane. So I'm going to start off with some black now. We're going to go ahead and switch to our black. We're going to start doing our final little details on here. And right in here, I want my island to just kind of nestle up into this background a bit. Right in here. And this is really, almost the full width of this canvas. I'm just going to kind of smudge in some black. Maybe about 3/4 of the width. And then Wizard Island really it's a cinder cone. So it's the top of the mountain that's tried to rebuild after this blew up. Now, I don't know if you know, but Crater Lake, it used to be known as Mount Mazama. Actually, it still is. The mountain is still known as Mount Mazama. But it blew up much the way Mount St. Helens did. It just did so very evenly across the top, which allowed the crater to fill with water. And then if you've ever seen Mount St. Helens, it started to build a new cone in the middle. And Mount Mazama did the same thing. And that's where we've got our Crater Lake, or our Wizard Island. So think of this mountain shape we've got over here. It's pretty broad. So pretty rare that you probably would never see Wizard Island laid out like this with the sunrise or the sunset right behind it. It just, it's part of an artistic interpretation, putting my own spin on it. But it's something that if you basically build a big lake with a crater rim and you put this mountain or this island that kind of looks like a mountain in the water, you put that in there, people are going to go, hey, I recognize that. That's Crater Lake. All right, so now obviously like right now that looks like it's just kind of pasted on there, and it's actually not too bad, but we need to do this little bit of, now my brush has gotten a little bit sticky, so I'm going to give it a quick rinse. Need to take a little bit of our black here, and again we're just going to mimic our shape. Now there's more shoreline than what we see here. There's more shoreline to Wizard Island. There's some extra little fingers and stuff, but those are kind of hidden by our reflection, and sometimes it's getting kind of too caught up in those little details. Sometimes you can do it. I mean, I like to do that. If you guys ever watch the videos where Jenny's teaching and I'm just following along, as and she does the same thing when she's taking one of mine, we both kind of stray off of the path of being exactly what the other person did. Artistic interpretation is what they call that. Anyway, so you can see now by adding that extra little bit of light color in the background, what we've been able to accomplish is now the island actually kind of shows up a little bit better. You can see that it's there. So the last real step we've got some trees to do. And trees are always a little bit of a tricky learning curve for people at the beginning. I'm going to show you a way that I really like to teach them that I think makes it easier for us to wrap our brains around. So first of all, what I want to do is I'm going to put in our near shore crater rim. We just want to make sure that the shoreline scoops down in the middle, because what we really want to try to do is create this kind of bowl shape that brings our eye back into the middle. And we want to do the same thing on the left-hand side. Kind of framing in our lake a bit. And it kind of covers up a lot of our elements of the reflection from our sky that we're maybe not super thrilled with. They felt out of place. I shouldn't say we're not super thrilled with them, they just felt kind of out of place. So let me grab a piece of, I'm just going to tear my palette paper off. I'm going to show you guys a little tree tutorial. And what I really like to do with trees is a lot of times people like to start off by painting. Let me show you how we start a lot of times. A lot of times people like to start with a trunk. Do it like this. Here's our trunk. And then when we start painting the trees, what happens is we start thinking trunk to branch. And that's not the worst thing in the world, but it kind of ends up being like a ladder, or some people do the branches like this, some people do them like this. And it really, there's a lot of things going on here that make a tree feel out of place. Now this painting as a whole right now feels very comfortable, and it feels very much like a kind of a nice finished piece. And I totally, okay, we're good. And really you could almost get away without doing a tree at all. But I would recommend is going ahead and doing one tree, just one to start with. And if that tree goes well, then you can do a couple more. But let me show you how I like to do a tree. I'm going to start with my smallest paintbrush, because one of the things that gets missed on trees a lot is the top of the tree. Of all the things to miss, it's the top. So I'm going to start, there's my top of my tree. Real simple. Now, what I like to do now is I like to build my tree down. And I want to talk about angles. So the angle is really important, because it's really easy to start, when I say angle, a tree needs to taper, and it's really easy to, that's kind of a nice taper there, maybe even a little sharp. A lot of times people start tapering too far, and they get a nice wide triangle going like that as they work their way down. And all of a sudden, if I were to keep this going down, I've just covered my whole painting. So I like to think of a clock face. Let me paint a clock face right here. We've got, right at the clock top, we've got 12 o'clock. And at the bottom, we've got 6. So we move over this way a little bit, we've got 5. Move over this way a little bit, we've got 7. So I like to think of our taper as going from 12 o'clock to 7 and 12 o'clock to 5. So I call it our 5 to 7 trees. So we're going to be basically painting this kind of angle is what we're going to shoot for. Now at the top of our tree, first couple little branches kind of do go up at an angle. And then from there, I'm just going to start working my brush. And you can maybe use your smallest brush for the top inch or so of your tree. Then maybe switch to your medium-sized brush. Flat brushes work really good for this because you don't have to do much. But the round brushes work good too. And I'm trying to make sure I'm varying it and making it not super symmetrical. Being too symmetrical, it feels like it's the right thing to do, but when you actually see it finished, something always feels a little bit off with that particular tree. Once I've gotten down to the point where I'm wider than my widest brush, I can kind of just start going like this. And just have a little bit of paint on the brush. Working my way down. And if I were to continue doing this, I would go all the way down till I hit the ground like so. It's really important to leave a nice little amount of gap in between your branches. And I think, close to 1/4 inch is about right. A lot of times people don't leave enough gap, and all of a sudden you step back and it just feels like a big triangle. So let's go ahead and do one tree. I think it's really important if we're going to do just one, it's got to be on the right-hand side. And if you're working with a partner, you both get to do one, so you can do one on the left, one on the right, and that works good. But I think one of the things that's really important when we're doing this is we want to make sure that our foreground, which is this black area in the bottom, that it reaches all the way up into our farthest background back, which is actually right in here. That's the farthest away from us that there is. So by doing that, what it does is it helps create some nice perspective for us. And I want to go a little bit taller than this mountain. I just really want that to not be competing with that horizon line. So there's the top of my tree. Now let's give a little bit of an angle. And if you need to rest your hand on the canvas, by all means you may. Just make sure that if you rest it in a damp part of the spot where you've got a little bit of damp paint, that you're not tracking that paint elsewhere on your canvas. Don't be like, our dog came in the other day after the sprinklers had been on, and she had walked in the mud and tracked mud everywhere. You don't want to be tracking mud all over your canvas because you put your pinky down on a wet spot. Switching brushes. And I really do more, rather than doing brush strokes, and I think a lot of times you put a paintbrush in somebody's hand and their instinct is, I have to do brush strokes. So I'm not going to do brush strokes. I'm doing more dabs of color. Now I can tell this tree is going to be a nice big tall tree, and it's going to keep getting wider. And you can see I've kind of got that 5 to 7 angle going, 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock from noon, from 12. If I were broader than that, that tree is this wide and we lose our painting, and we don't want to do that. And so sometimes it's right about this point in time, maybe right about the first inch is a good time to kind of check yourself and think, if I keep going at this line, where's this going to go? You can kind of make little adjustments to kind of rein it back in. But you want to be careful that you don't just create this big, huge blob. I'll do another one, you guys can see it again. I'm just going to keep working my way down, just plain black. And one of the things you can do is when you start getting into this bigger brush, it's really important. I mentioned the gaps before, and it's really important to make sure you're leaving those gaps. Because in reality, I'm painting this tree, and while it's this wide, it's really only covering up a smaller area in the middle. I just keep working my way down. If you want to use your smaller brush for this, by all means you may. It's just going to take longer. I think also a lot of times when we use too small of a brush, we end up overthinking every little brush stroke and really thinking of it like a fine detail. Now the other thing you'll find is when you do these trees is one side of the canvas will be easier than the other side. So if you're like me and you're working by yourself, this side may be easier or this side may be easier. It just kind of depends. Everybody's a little bit different. It's just because of the way our wrists work. But you can see I kind of was getting a little bit wide maybe, and I kind of just let it kind of, that taper, just ease up just a little bit before it got out of control. So let me go ahead and do one over on the far left. We'll see which side of the canvas is easier for Paul to paint on. Probably going to say the right, just because of the way we're sitting. So again, I'm going to start this one I'm going to start a little smidge up into the sky, just a little bit. Start with our little top, like so. I'll try to keep my hand out of the way. Again, a very important reason why we added that little bit of a lighter color over the top. We're able then to let this tree stand out a bit. Switch brushes really quick. Go to my medium-sized brush. Now these are a great way, like if you've got a little transition area or something you're not real happy with, these trees are a great thing to put right over the top. Kind of hide that transition. Maybe transition maybe isn't the right word, but element would be a better word probably. Just gonna keep working my way down. Working. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, I see trunk at the bottom of trees. Okay, yeah, sometimes. Usually you do. But what happens is if I were to leave this tree right now and just put a trunk on here like that, okay, will I see that out in nature? Sure, once in a while. Yeah, actually a lot of times. But on a painting, it doesn't necessarily feel resolved. It feels like it's just kind of stuck in there. And that's not always what we want. But if that's really what you want to do, that's fine. Don't let me discourage you from doing it the way you want to do it. There you go. There's 2 trees. And let's see. Let me see what does the original have on it. Let's look here. Let me lean over. Yeah, we got about 4 trees on that original. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and do all 4 just so you guys can see them. I'll just rip these out real quick here. I've got one more that just kind of goes right up in here. Now, I've done these full trees in the past using just the biggest paintbrush, but sometimes that gets a little intense, a little too hard to control. But if you practice with your big brush, you can get used to just using just the corner of the brush. And you'll find that sometimes doing a tree, it's really a great tool just for knocking out a quick little tree. In fact, I'll do the last tree just with the big brush, and you can see this one's getting a little broader, but that's okay. I mean, it is in a forest, so just because there's a big hole in the ground with a bunch of water in it doesn't mean that there's not a forest of trees around the edge. Alright, there's one more. So let me do one small one. Let's go right here, right next to this other one. Start with my top. And I'm just using the corner of the brush. A little flare. And this one's just gonna kind of disappear into the other one on the left. I'm sorry, on its right. It's just to the left of the other one. So that's it, you guys. That is our Crater Lake date painting. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry I had a few little technical difficulties. There was a setting on the camera I had to adjust. I'm gonna sign this, call it good. I'm just gonna do my little initial right here. Perfect. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for painting with me tonight. I had a great time. I hope you did too. Crater Lake's near and dear to my heart. It's one of my favorite things to paint. It's so many different ways we can paint it. Same with like Multnomah Falls or any scene. There's so many different seasons. There's so many different light. There's so much different weather. Anyway, I hope you had a great time. Check back with us soon. I'm sure we'll do another date night soon. And if you're really excited about what we're doing, make sure that you hop on and get one of our subscription boxes that we send you two projects every single month. And also, if you're just stumbling across, you're having a good time, you're like, wow, I like that guy and his way is painting, maybe you could support us at Patreon, on our Patreon page. I'll put the link down in the comments, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.